Have you ever wondered why their departure felt so sudden, so cruel, so inexplicable? Have you ever asked yourself how someone who claimed to love you could walk away so easily, replace you so quickly, forget you so completely? You've been telling yourself they left you behind. You've been carrying the weight of abandonment, the shame of not being enough, the confusion of being discarded. But here's the truth that will shatter everything you thought you knew about what happened. They didn't leave you behind. They were never with you to begin with. What you called love was projection. What you called connection was convenience. What you called loyalty was simply the comfort of having someone predictable in their orbit. You weren't a person to them. You were a function, a role, a service they could access whenever they needed emotional regulation. You became their human antidepressant, their walking therapy session, their emotional first aid kit. And when the crisis passed, when their wounds healed temporarily, when their chaos settled for a moment, they put you back on the shelf until the next emergency. You fell in love with who you thought they were. They fell in love with what you could provide. This wasn't mutual recognition. This was mutual delusion. You were both in love with ghosts, with possibilities, with performances that had nothing to do with reality. You loved their potential. They loved your utility. Neither of you was actually present for the other. The moment you stopped being useful, the moment you needed something back, the moment you showed your real self instead of your serving self, they didn't leave. They revealed what was always true. They were never there. You were alone from the beginning, but you were too busy performing to notice. You were too busy being who they needed you to be to remember who you actually were. This isn't about heartbreak. This is about awakening. Because once you see this pattern, once you understand how you've been casting yourself in other people's stories while abandoning your own, everything changes. The pain you're feeling isn't loss, it's recognition. It's the ache of coming back to yourself after a long, long absence from your own life. You learned early that love had conditions. Be good, be helpful, don't be too much. Don't ask for too much. Don't have needs when others have bigger needs. Don't take up space when others need room to spread out. So you became the emotional caretaker, the problem solver, the one who always understood, always forgave, always gave one more chance. You thought this was love. It was survival strategy. It was the adaptation of a child who learned that being needed was the closest thing to being wanted. They didn't see your kindness as a gift. They saw it as a guarantee. Your empathy became their emotional insurance policy. Your availability became their safety net. Your understanding became their get-out-of-jail-free card for every hurt they caused, every promise they broke, every time they chose themselves over you. And when insurance policies expire, when safety nets break, when cards get used up, you don't mourn them. You replace them. You find new ones. You upgrade to a better plan with fewer restrictions and higher coverage. That's what happened to you. You weren't loved and lost. You were used and discarded when your warranty ran out. The relationship you thought was deep was actually shallow. The connection you thought was real was actually transactional. They didn't know your favorite color, your childhood fears, your secret dreams, the way you laugh when you're truly happy. They knew your function. They knew your utility. They knew exactly which buttons to push to get what they needed from you. You were being had, not being loved. You were a resource to be extracted from, not a person to be cherished. And the moment you tried to exist as yourself rather than as their emotional service provider, they couldn't recognize you anymore. Because they never learned your real name, they only knew your job title. Customer service representative, emotional support specialist, available 24/7 for all their crisis management needs. This is why their departure felt so sudden, so cruel, so inexplicable. You thought you were building something together. You thought you were creating a foundation for a life, a future, a shared story. But you were just maintaining their comfort while they figured out their next move. You were the stepping stone, not the destination. The rest stop, not the home. The placeholder until something better came along. The more useful you made yourself, the less human you became. The more you proved your worth through service, the more you disappeared as a person with your own needs, dreams, desires, and boundaries. You became a function in their life story, not a character with your own plot. You shared your secrets thinking it created intimacy. You opened your wounds thinking it built trust. You gave your time, energy, and attention thinking it proved your worth. You confessed your fears, revealed your vulnerabilities, showed them the parts of yourself you'd never shown anyone else. But intimacy requires two people. What you had was a monologue disguised as a dialogue. You were confessing to a wall that had learned to nod at the right moments and say the right words to keep you talking. You became the screen onto which they projected their ideal companion, supportive but not needy, present but not overwhelming, giving but not taking, understanding but not complicated, available but not desperate, strong enough to carry their problems but weak enough never to challenge their choices. You became their fantasy of perfect love without any of the messiness of actual human connection. They loved the version of you that existed for them, the you that didn't have bad days unless they coincidentally aligned with their good days, the you that didn't have needs unless those needs somehow served their narrative or made them feel needed in return, the you that didn't require reciprocity because you were just naturally giving, naturally selfless, naturally designed to serve without expecting anything back. But that version was a performance, and performances are exhausting. Every day you woke up and put on the costume of who they needed you to be. The moment you dropped the mask, showed your humanity, needed something back, had a crisis that wasn't convenient for them, expressed an opinion that didn't validate their worldview, or asked for the same energy you'd been giving, they stopped recognizing you. You became a stranger wearing the face of someone they used to find useful. And strangers, no matter how familiar they look, don't get the same treatment as friends. They get polite distance. They get slow fade-outs. They get replaced without explanation or apology. This is why you feel so confused, so lost, so questioning of your own reality. Because for so long, you existed through their eyes. You knew yourself through their reactions. You felt real through their validation. Your sense of self was built on their approval, their attention, their need for you. And when they withdrew that reflection, you disappeared too. Not because you were never real, but because you had forgotten how to see yourself without their mirror. The intimacy you thought you shared was really just you being intimate with your own projection of who they could be, while they were intimate with their projection of who you should be. Two people loving ghosts, missing each other completely, calling it connection. No wonder it felt so lonely even when you were together. No wonder you always felt like something was missing. Like you were never quite reaching them, no matter how much of yourself you offered. If this is hitting something deep, if you're finally seeing the pattern that's been invisible to you for so long, subscribe now. Because what's coming next will show you why this recognition, as painful as it is not the end of your story, but the beginning of your freedom. This is where you stop being a supporting character in someone else's life and start being the main character in your own. There's a type of person who feeds on others' emotional energy without ever giving back, but that term doesn't capture the full horror of what they do. Vampires, at least in mythology, are honest about what they are. They don't pretend to love you while they drain you. They don't make you feel grateful for the privilege of being consumed. They don't convince you that your blood loss is actually a sign of how generous and loving you are. You were their food source. Your empathy fed their ego. Your understanding validated their chaos. Your forgiveness enabled their patterns. Your loyalty gave them permission to be disloyal. Your love became the foundation they stood on while they reached for someone else. They didn't love you, they needed you. And need masquerading as love is the cruelest deception of all, because it feels so much like the real thing. It mimics all the symptoms of connection while slowly poisoning the host. They made you carry their shame, their pain, their responsibility, their unfinished emotional business. Every time they hurt you and you forgave them, you took on a piece of their guilt. Every time they failed you and you made excuses for them, you absorbed their accountability. Every time they disappointed you and you convinced yourself it was okay, you swallowed their consequences. You thought you were helping. You thought you were healing. You thought you were loving. You were being harvested. Your emotional labor became their emotional profit. When you finally got tired, when you finally said no, when you finally asked for something in return, when you finally needed them to show up the way you had been showing up for months or years, they didn't fight for you. They moved on, immediately, seamlessly, without grief, without guilt, without a backward glance, without a single attempt to repair what was broken or address what you were asking for. Because emotional vampires don't fight for their food, they find new sources. The speed of their replacement of you should tell you everything about what you actually meant to them. This is why you feel so drained, so empty, so confused about who you are without them. Because you gave away pieces of yourself thinking it was love. You poured your life force into their emptiness, thinking it would create connection. You fed their hunger, thinking it would make them grateful, make them see your worth, make them choose you. But emotional vampires are never satisfied. They're never grateful. They're never full. They just move on to the next source when the current one runs dry or starts asking for reciprocity. You weren't in a relationship. You were in an extraction operation. They mined you for everything valuable. Your emotional labor, your understanding, your forgiveness, your hope, your belief in them, your willingness to see the best in them despite all evidence to the contrary, and left when the well ran dry. The ache you feel isn't heartbreak, it's recovery. Your energy is slowly coming back home to you. Your emotional resources are regenerating. Your capacity for love is returning to its rightful owner, you. The most terrifying moment is when you realize you've been living someone else's version of your life. When you see that the person you thought loved you was actually managing you. When you understand that their presence in your life was conditional on your usefulness to theirs. When you recognize that every conversation was an audition, every interaction a performance review, every moment of vulnerability a test you didn't know you were taking. But this moment of horror is also a moment of birth, because for the first time you're seeing clearly. The fog of false connection is lifting. The illusion of mutual love is dissolving. The fantasy of being understood is crumbling. The story you told yourself about what you meant to them is finally being replaced by the truth. And in that clear, cold space, something new can emerge. Something real. Something that belongs entirely to you. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you really are rather than who others need you to be. Your recognition that they were never with you is your individuation moment. The external source of validation is gone. The false idol of their approval has crumbled. The shrine you built around their opinion of you has been revealed as empty. Now you must learn to love yourself, not because they reflected it back to you, but because you exist. Not because you're useful, but because you're human. Not because you serve a function in someone else's story, but because you have inherent worth in your own story. This is terrifying because it's lonely. It's also liberating because it's real. You're no longer performing for an audience that was never paying attention. You're no longer auditioning for a role in someone else's life while abandoning the leading role in your own. You're the director now, the star, the entire cast. The story is yours to write, and you don't need anyone's permission to make it beautiful. You can choose to see this as rejection or as redirection, as abandonment or as freedom, as proof that you're unlovable or as evidence that you're finally ready for real love. Because now you know the difference. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't need you to be less so someone else can be more. Real love doesn't turn you into a function, a service, a resource to be consumed. Real love sees your complexity and calls it beautiful. It witnesses your needs and calls them valid. It encounters your authenticity and calls it home. Real love doesn't drain you. It multiplies you. It doesn't diminish you. It reveals you. It doesn't make you smaller. It shows you how vast you really are. Real love doesn't require auditions. It doesn't demand performances. It doesn't need you to earn it through service or prove it through sacrifice. Real love recognizes you, chooses you, celebrates you as you are, not as a project to be managed or a resource to be consumed. You weren't left behind. You were set free. The prison door you thought was locked was never locked at all. You were holding the key the entire time, but you were too busy serving your captor to notice. They didn't leave you behind because they were never with you in the first place. But now, finally, you can be with yourself. And that's where all real love begins. In the quiet space where you meet yourself without apology, without performance, without the need to be anything other than exactly who you are. The relationship you thought you lost was a prison disguised as paradise. Their departure wasn't abandonment, it was liberation. You're not behind, you're ahead. You're not lost, you're found. You're not broken, you're breaking free. You're not too much. You were just with someone who was too little. You're not unlovable. You were just loving someone who was incapable of love. Subscribe if you're ready to stop performing for people who never saw you anyway. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they weren't abandoned. They were freed from a cage they didn't even know they were in. Comment below if you're finally ready to choose authentic connection over convenient illusion. And remember, the right people don't require you to be less than yourself to love you. They require you to be more. They celebrate your fullness instead of feeding off your emptiness. They want to know you, not use you. And those people exist. But first, you have to stop accepting counterfeits and start believing you deserve the real thing.